Can China become the world's next superpower? And who will gain or lose the most? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Today we address a question that is no longer limited to academic debates or political think tanks, but one that directly affects the future of global power, economic stability, and international security. The question is simple, yet its implications are enormous. Can China become the world's next superpower? And if it does, who stands to benefit the most? And who will suffer the greatest losses? For decades, the global order has been dominated by Western powers, particularly the United States. Since the end of World War II, America has shaped international institutions, global trade rules, military alliances, and even cultural influence. However, history teaches us that no superpower remains unchallenged forever. In the last 40 years, China has transformed itself from a largely agrarian society into the world's second-largest economy. This transformation did not happen overnight, nor was it accidental. It was the result of long-term planning, disciplined governance, and a strategic vision focused on national strength and global relevance. China's rise began with economic reforms in the late 1970s, opening its doors to global trade while maintaining strict political control at home. Over time, China became the world's manufacturing hub. From electronics to clothing, machinery to medical equipment, made in China became a global reality. This manufacturing dominance gave China not just wealth, but leverage. Leverage over supply chains that many countries now heavily depend on. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed just how deeply the world relies on Chinese production, raising serious concerns in Western capitals about economic security and dependence. But economic strength alone does not make a superpower. True global power is built on multiple pillars: economic influence, military capability, technological leadership, diplomatic reach, and cultural impact. China has been investing aggressively in all of these areas. Its military modernization has accelerated, with advanced missile systems, a rapidly expanding navy, cyber warfare capabilities, and growing space ambitions. While China's military footprint abroad is still limited compared to the United States, its focus on regional dominance, particularly in the South China Sea and around Taiwan, signals a clear intention to reshape the balance of power in Asia. Technology is another critical battleground. China has made massive investments in artificial intelligence, 5G telecommunications, quantum computing, and surveillance technologies. Companies like Huawei, Tencent, and Alibaba are not just commercial entities. They are strategic tools in China's global influence. Control over data, digital infrastructure, and emerging technologies could define the next era of global leadership. In this race, China is not merely catching up. It is competing head-to-head with the world's most advanced economies. One of China's most ambitious strategies is the Belt and Road Initiative, a global infrastructure project spanning Asia, Africa, Europe, and parts of Latin America. Through loans, ports, railways, and energy projects, China has extended its economic and political reach into dozens of countries. Supporters argue that this initiative brings development to regions long ignored by Western investment. Critics, however, warn of debt diplomacy, where countries become financially dependent on China, limiting their political freedom and strategic choices. Regardless of perspective, the Belt and Road Initiative represents a new model of global influence, one based on infrastructure and economic ties rather than military occupation. Yet China's path to superpower status is not without serious challenges. Internally, China faces economic slowdowns, an aging population, rising unemployment among youth, and increasing inequality. The Chinese growth model, long driven by exports and construction, is showing signs of strain. Internationally, China is encountering growing resistance. From trade restrictions and technology bans to strengthened military alliances in the Indo-Pacific, many countries are actively working to counterbalance China's rise. The question, therefore, is not just whether China can become a superpower, but whether it can sustain that position in a world that is increasingly cautious, divided, and competitive. As China pushes forward, the global consequences will be profound. Power shifts on this scale rarely happen peacefully or without disruption. Markets will react, alliances will shift, and smaller nations will be forced to make difficult choices. Some countries will see opportunity in China's rise, while others will view it as a direct threat to their security, sovereignty, and economic independence. This brings us to the most critical part of the discussion: who benefits and who loses if China becomes the dominant global power. The answer lies not only in geopolitics, but in economics, technology, and the very rules that govern international behavior. In the next part of this analysis, we will examine which regions and countries stand to gain from China's rise, and which may find themselves paying the highest price in a rapidly changing world order. As China's global influence expands, the countries most directly affected will not be the traditional powers alone, but the developing world, particularly nations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. For many of these countries, China represents opportunity. Chinese investments arrive quickly, often without the political conditions attached by Western institutions such as the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. Roads, ports, railways, power plants, and digital infrastructure have been built at a speed that local governments could not achieve on their own. For leaders facing economic pressure and public demand for development, China's approach appears practical, efficient, and attractive. However, these benefits come with complex long-term consequences. Many recipient countries have taken large loans from Chinese banks, often with limited transparency and high repayment obligations. When these nations struggle to repay, China gains leverage, not necessarily through military force, but through economic pressure. Strategic assets such as ports, mining rights, and energy facilities can quietly shift under Chinese control. This has raised serious concerns about sovereignty and decision-making freedom. In this sense, China's rise may benefit developing nations in the short term while placing them in vulnerable positions over time. In contrast, the greatest strategic losses may be felt by established Western powers, particularly the United States. For decades, the U.S. has dominated global finance, technology standards, military alliances, and international institutions. China's rise directly challenges this dominance. In trade, American companies face increasing competition from Chinese firms backed by state support. In technology, China's push for alternative systems, such as its own digital payment networks, satellite navigation, and communication infrastructure, threatens to weaken U.S.-led global standards. If China succeeds in setting new global norms, American influence over international rules could significantly decline. Europe faces a more complicated position. On one hand, European economies benefit from trade with China and rely heavily on Chinese manufacturing. On the other hand, European leaders are increasingly cautious about overdependence. Security concerns, human rights issues, and strategic autonomy have forced Europe to reconsider its relationship with Beijing. A stronger China may push Europe into a difficult balancing act, economically connected to China, yet politically aligned with the United States. This tension could reshape Europe's global role in the decades ahead. One of the most sensitive and dangerous dimensions of China's rise is its relationship with its neighbors, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. Countries such as Japan, South Korea, India, Vietnam, and the Philippines closely watch China's military expansion and territorial claims. The South China Sea has become a flashpoint, with China asserting control over key maritime routes critical to global trade. Taiwan remains the most serious and unpredictable issue. Any major conflict in this region would not only disrupt global supply chains, but could pull major powers into a direct confrontation. A superpower transition in such a tense environment carries enormous risks. At the same time, China's rise forces smaller nations to make strategic choices. Many countries prefer not to choose sides between China and the West, yet may find neutrality increasingly difficult. Trade, security partnerships, technology access, and diplomatic pressure will shape their decisions. In a China-led global system, alignment may bring economic rewards, while resistance could result in exclusion or retaliation. This dynamic alone could redefine international diplomacy, replacing multilateral cooperation with strategic alignment and competition. China itself is not immune to the costs of superpower status. Global leadership brings global responsibility. As China's influence grows, so do expectations. The international community increasingly demands transparency, crisis management, and accountability. Managing global conflicts, financial instability, climate change, and humanitarian crises requires cooperation and compromise. China's traditional policy of non-interference is already under strain, and its ability to adapt to this role will determine whether it is seen as a stabilizing force or a disruptive one. Another major challenge lies within China's domestic structure. Economic growth has slowed, debt levels are high, and confidence among younger generations is declining. A shrinking workforce and aging population threaten long-term productivity. Social stability, information control, and political legitimacy remain constant priorities for Beijing. History shows that internal instability can weaken even the most powerful nations. A true superpower must be strong at home as well as abroad. The global economy will also undergo major shifts if China becomes the dominant power. Supply chains may reorganize around Chinese standards and logistics networks. The use of the Chinese currency in international trade could increase, challenging the dominance of the US dollar. Financial institutions, development banks, and trade frameworks may evolve to reflect Chinese priorities. For countries aligned with China, this could mean greater access and influence. For others, it could mean exclusion from critical economic systems. Perhaps the most important question is not whether China will surpass existing powers, but what kind of superpower it will become. Will it promote cooperation, stability, and shared growth? Or will it prioritize national interest above global balance? Will its influence lead to a more multipolar world or replace one dominant power with another? These questions remain unanswered, but the decisions made today will shape the future for generations. As history reminds us, global power transitions are rarely smooth. They create uncertainty, opportunity, and risk in equal measure. China's rise is already changing how nations think, trade, and defend themselves. Whether this transformation leads to progress or conflict depends not only on China, but on how the rest of the world responds. In the next part of this analysis, we will take a deeper look at the future scenarios, what a China-led world order might realistically look like, how the United States and its allies may respond, and whether the world is heading toward cooperation, competition, or confrontation in the decades ahead. To understand where the world may be heading, we must examine the possible future scenarios of a China-led global order. History shows that power transitions rarely happen in a straight line. Instead, they unfold through phases of cooperation, rivalry, tension, and adjustment. China's rise will likely follow the same pattern. Rather than a sudden takeover of global leadership, the world may enter a prolonged period where power is shared, contested, and redefined. One possible scenario is the emergence of a multipolar world, where China becomes one of several dominant powers rather than the single global leader. In this system, the United States, China, the European Union, and regional powers like India would each exert influence within their spheres. China's strength in manufacturing, infrastructure, and regional security would balance against American dominance in finance, innovation, and military alliances. This scenario could reduce the risk of direct confrontation, but it would also increase competition, forcing countries to constantly adapt to shifting alliances and interests. Another scenario is a gradual decline of Western dominance, combined with the steady expansion of Chinese influence. This would not require China to defeat the United States militarily or economically. Instead, it would occur through long-term trends: slower growth in Western economies, political polarization, weakening institutions, and reduced global trust. In contrast, China could continue to present itself as a stable, long-term partner, especially to developing nations. Over time, influence would shift not because of force, but because of perceived reliability and opportunity. The response of the United States will be one of the most decisive factors in shaping this future. Rather than accepting decline, Washington has already begun adjusting its strategy. Trade restrictions, technology controls, investment screening, and strengthened alliances in the Indo-Pacific are all part of an effort to slow China's rise. At the same time, the U.S. is investing heavily in domestic manufacturing, semiconductors, clean energy, and advanced research. This indicates that the future may not be about replacement, but rivalry, two powerful systems competing for global leadership. Military balance will remain a critical element of this competition. While the United States maintains global military superiority, China has focused on developing capabilities designed to counter U.S. power in its own region. This includes advanced missile systems, cyber warfare, and anti-access strategies that limit foreign military presence near its borders. The danger here lies not in intentional war, but in miscalculation. As military forces operate closer together, particularly in the South China Sea and around Taiwan, the risk of escalation increases significantly. Technology will likely determine the long-term winner of this global competition. Control over artificial intelligence, biotechnology, space systems, and digital infrastructure will shape economic productivity, military capability, and political influence. China's ability to scale technology quickly gives it an advantage, while Western systems benefit from innovation driven by open competition and research freedom. The outcome of this race is uncertain, but its impact will be decisive. Countries aligned with the technological leader will gain access, security, and growth, while others may be left behind. Global governance is another area undergoing transformation. Institutions created after World War II were largely shaped by Western values and priorities. As China's influence grows, it seeks greater representation and authority within these structures, or alternative institutions altogether. New development banks, trade frameworks, and diplomatic platforms reflect this shift. The question is whether these systems will complement existing institutions or replace them. A fragmented global governance system could reduce cooperation and increase instability.